pour one out for our fallen friend Dan of Leave and the Hudson Horror, as this was one of his favorite bands.
One for me, and one for my homies.
Today we are ranking the albums of death metal group Aborted, and we are starting with The Purity of Perversion in 1999. Sometimes it's crazy when you stop and think about how long some of these bands have actually been around, and cool to see them start out though right from the beginning with the horror movie samples and song titles. Love the carcassy riffs on the Hellraiser themed Lament configuration in particular. Not much of their own identity yet, with Sven mostly breeing his way through this thing, just brutal death metal clearly inspired by the likes of Cannibal Corpse and Dying Fetus, with a bit of gore grind in there as well. Not bad at all, in fact, within the scope of what was releasing in 1999. It's pretty strong, but I think that within the scope of their entire discography, there are just much better and more representative albums to come. So for that reason, it is going to good tier. They followed that up with Engineering the Dead in 2001. This one largely picks up where the last album left off and leaves me with pretty similar thoughts overall. Plenty of great riffs throughout and adding a little more groove and dynamics. Solid opener, if a little repetitive at times. The title track and sphinctral enthrallment are definitely standouts, as are a few others here whose names I can't even try to say on YouTube. Mixed thoughts on which of these first two I enjoy more. I think this one has a bit more character and variety, but I also love the simple-minded caveman violence of the debut. In any case, both have certainly grown on me since the last time I did this. It is also going to good tier. Then we have Goremageddon, the Saw and the Carnage done in 2003. The title is a reference to the Neil Young song The Needle and the Damage Done, which is great, by the way. That grindy opening track really makes a statement, and I'm hearing a significant step forwards in instrumentation with this one, with that razor-sharp focus on battering speed that I've come to love about this band. We've also got basically an all-new lineup, which is kind of the case with most of these early albums, with Sven being the only consistent member for quite a while. But we've got Dirk of Soilwork and Mortuary doing session drums, and let me just say, he kills it on this album. Also really love the mellow-deathy riffs on Charted Carnal Effigy, hinting towards their sound to come. Great solos, Sven starting to come into his own, and pretty sick cover of Carcass's Carnal Forge too, that knocked me on my ass as a bonus track. This was the first album from them where I really fully started to enjoy myself, and it's easily my favorite of their earlier works, so it is going to great tier. I know some people would put it higher. Speaking of which, we have plenty more albums to go, but let me know, where would you rank these? Do you put some higher, some lower? Where do we agree? Where do we disagree? Let's have a conversation there, because my opinion is just that. It's an opinion. And also, if you're enjoying the video, hit the like button because it helps me out. But next up, we have the Archaic Abattoir in 2005. Another total lineup overhaul leading to a less grindy album with a lot more groove, though it does still have some blast beat driven stuff like Just Stated Rabidity. Blood Fixing the Bled and the Inertia even have some kind of Every Time I Die sounding riffs that kind of have that southern dirtbag bluesy flair to it. Speaking of which too, it wasn't until I said Blood Fixing the Bled out loud that I realized how ridiculous that sounded. I thought I was even saying it wrong, and I had to look it up to double check that that is the actual title. This has its high points like the Gangrenous Epitaph, but ultimately ends up feeling very disjointed to me, especially when compared to, again, that razor-sharp focus of the previous album, so this one feels like a step back. Even the most listened Spotify track, Hecatome, strikes me as kind of bland, so this is going to okay. Then we have Slaughter and Apparatus, a Methodical Overture in 2007. David Haley from Psychroptic stepping in on drums, and also notably Jeff Walker of Carcass is listed as additional personnel on this album. And speaking of which, the Chondrin Enigma is a solid opener with more very Carcass vibes, and I hear it on other tracks as well. Ingenuity and Genocide is another standout. Solid fusion here of the groove and melodic elements with the faster parts. Tracks like Avinius and Odious Emanation, Underneath Royulent Soil, and the Foul Nucleus of Resurrection show them finally flexing their more atmospheric side that I also associate with their later albums. Overall, I really dig the steps forward on this one, and it's a clever take also on Faith No More's Surprise You're Dead as a bonus track. This one is also going to great tier. Then we have Strychnine 213 in 2008. Unfortunately, once more, many of these songs feel like a step backwards to me. This is a very back-to-basics death metal album that just feels like it's trying to jump on 2000s Gothenburg melodic death metal trends in the laziest way possible. There are a few solid bangers like Pestiferous Subterfuge in particular standing out with great bass and guitar, but the rest is pretty meh. Aborted has a pretty interesting early discography because again, each time it's nearly a completely different band, so it's kind of a crapshoot in terms of whether the next album is going to be good or terrible or just somewhere in between, as opposed to like a gradual maturation and evolution of sound that we see with most bands. This is probably the only time too where I'd say that even the bonus cover, which in this case is for Pantera, kinda sucks, so I'm putting this one at okay tier. It's probably my least favorite at this point. But then we get Global Flatline in 2012. Now we enter what I consider to be the golden age of the Aborted discography, with Sven's delivery, that mix of brutality and atmosphere, and the stepped-up production all taking them to a new summit. We also finally get another present-day member here with Ken Badin joining on drums. Lots of bangers here: the title track, The Origin of Disease, The Calendar Theory, and Vermicular Obscene Obese, which features a great guest spot from the late great Trevor of the Black Dahlia Murder. Lots of other great guest spots too, including members of Misery Index, Rotten Sound, and Benighted, and get used to seeing Julian making an appearance on most of their albums from here on out. Coronary Reconstruction also has some wailing guitars on it, lots of killer solos and great hooks in general. Very strong album, if dragging a little towards the end, and at this point the rankings get so difficult as they only vary by degrees. So this one is going to fantastic, just short of perfection. Next up is the Necrotic Manifesto in 2014. The mighty Mendel stepping in on guitar for the next 3 albums, I think, and I very much enjoy him and his solo material as well since he's moved on. More guest appearances from members of the Acacia Strain and Wormed. Lots of killer songs. The title track just destroys me every time. Great sample opening Your Entitlement Means Nothing, which is perfectly suited to this band, and Coffin Upon Coffin is like at the gates on steroids. But the slower moments are also great, like the squealy guitars on Die Verzweiflung, which has this kind of behemoth demigod energy. Cenobites is super epic with its death clock harmonies, and then a suffocation and death metalized Converge Concubine cover.
Yes, please!
I don't think it's quite as good as Global Flatline as a whole, but it's damn close, so I'm gonna put this one at amazing. Then we have Retrogore in 2016. Wall-to-wall bangers on this album, coming in hot with the straight-for-the-throat opening title track. I love everything about this one, and it's great enough on its own, but further amplified by more incredible guest spots, this time from members of Revocation, Origin, Benighted again, and freaking Cattle Decapitation on the intensely evil-sounding Divine Impediment. Personal favorites on this one, the title track, Cadaverous Banquet, and Termination Redux. So many great scream-along moments, too, that really stick in your brain and are awesome for those crowd interaction moments at shows. And bonus clout for sampling my spirit animal House on Coven of Ignorance.
Seizing or dancing?
Seizing.
Playing the B-side is even worse.
Just an all-around great time. Very fun. We're entering my favorite era of their album artwork as well. I think it's among their best and the first album I tend to recommend to new listeners out there, so it's going to perfection. Then we have TerrorVision in 2018. Really solid follow-up to an already critically lauded album and named for the underrated 80s film of the same name. Songs bring a similar energy too, with plenty of high points: Vespertine Decay, Visceral Despondency, Deep Red, love the reference to Argento there, and Exquisite Covenous Drama. All of these tracks just destroy. Lots of killer solos too, and other little surprises sprinkled throughout. Excellent riffing, tons of hooks. Deep Red again in particular is just a rager, and I love the tapping parts on Squalor Opera. Also great spooky 80s synth on Closer the Final Absolution, and more great guest vocals from members of Septic Flesh, Cytotoxin, and of course Benighted. Similar vibe overall, but maybe not quite as good as Retrogore. If I were deciding which one I wanted to listen to between just these two, it's going to be Retrogore most of the time, but it is very close, so this one's also going to fantastic. Then we got ManiaCult in 2021. This album opens with their moodiest, most serious sounding intro to date, and I'd say it acts as a pretty fair signal of what's to come. Much of the humor feels stripped away here in favor of mournful Bioshock-esque sounding piano interludes and tracks like Drag Me to Hell and the incredibly infectious Impetus Odi, which, while undoubtedly heavy, also carries this extra sense of gravitas to it that I compare to Cattle Decapitation. Personally, I think that silliness and escapism is actually what I look for the most right now, more than ever, but that said, ManiaCult doesn't come off as pretentious or boring either, and tracks like Dementophobia still bring some of that old energy musically. I also appreciate these shorter songs, leaving me wanting more rather than waiting for them to end, as was the case with some of the earlier albums, and they managed to pack in a ton of incredible atmosphere and pace changes, with the closing track in particular doing a great job of ending things on a high dramatic note. To sum up, I did miss some of the campier elements that made Retrogore so entertaining and re-listenable, but I can't really complain either with how tight and menacing this one is, so it is going to amazing. And that brings us to Vault of Horrors in 2024. I feel like my unholy prayers have been answered with this one, as this record feels like it brings that same consistency and intensity from that previous album and fuses it with the campier elements I loved about Retrogore. Also, their biggest list of guest spots yet, with someone on every single track from Shadow of Intent, Flesh God Apocalypse, Angelmaker, Cryptopsy, Ingested, Engulf, Archspire, Signs of the Swarm, Of Sulfur, and Despised Icon. Spencer Cregan also provides some excellent synth work as he has for the likes of Carnifex. My personal favorite is probably Ollie from Archspire on The Shape of Hate, since his machine gun vocals meld so perfectly with the lightning fast music. But then there are plenty of other tracks that instantly got their hooks in me, like Death Cult, Insect Politics, and
The Golgothan.
A what? A shit demon!
frankly, every song here is fantastic, with a great start-to-finish flow that has an emphasis on speed and heaviness, but masterfully broken up by the melodic and atmospheric elements. And once more, I love the artwork. In particular, it makes me want to say,
"This is my design."
I honestly wasn't sure what to expect from this one, but I really do think they've managed to outdo themselves once again. I had the same hype reaction to this one that I did going into Retrogore, and honestly, it only gets better and better with each listen. I've not been able to put it down. So for that reason, it is going all the way to perfection. Y'all check out this playlist for more death metal rankings, and again, let me know down in the comments what are your favorites, your least favorites, and why. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.